Hello and welcome to this video cast for subscribers to davidicke.com. Well, slowly but surely, and in recent days, a bit quicker, the truth is coming to light about Tony Blair and the invasion of Iraq in 2003. I wrote a book in 2003 called Tales from the Time Loop, which set out the scam, the manipulation, and the sequence that led to the lie and lies that produced the manufactured excuse to invade Iraq. And what's coming to light bit by bit is confirming that sequence. First of all, we've had a memo come into the public arena written by Colin Powell, who was Secretary of State in the US in the run-up and during the invasion of Iraq. And they call him Colin, but his name's spelled Colin. I can only surmise that they call him Colin because he's full of shit, because that is what came to be obvious when he was doing a presentation to the United Nations in the run-up to the Iraq invasion, selling the blatant lie that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction which he was going to unleash on the world. And this memo confirmed, and it was written in late March 2002, it confirmed that Tony Blair, British Prime Minister, was on board and supporting the American plans for the invasion of Iraq. That is late March 2002. And right up to the invasion in the spring of 2003, Tony Blair was still lying through his bloody teeth to the British Parliament and the British people, saying that even at this late stage in the run-up to the invasion, it could still be avoided if Saddam gave up his weapons of mass destruction, which didn't exist. So we'll look at what he said, Mr. Liar, and genetically so. This is a speech or a statement to the House of Commons on February the 25th, 2003, very close to the invasion. And he said, "I detest his, Saddam's, regime. But even now, he, Saddam, can save it by complying with the UN's demand. Even now, we are prepared to go the extra step to achieve disarmament peacefully. I do not want war." Breathe, Dave, breathe. "But disarmament peacefully can only happen with Saddam's active cooperation." The truth? They knew those weapons of mass destruction didn't exist, but they needed an excuse to go to war as part of picking off regime after regime and country after country in the Middle East, which has gone on ever since. Something else that we now know is covered in this story: burn it, destroy it. And this is the fact that in the run-up to the Iraq invasion, Tony Blair's Attorney General, Lord Goldsmith, said that the invasion was likely to be challenged under international law as illegal, which would make the people taking part war criminals. And when that advice was presented, someone in the Blair government circle, according to this story, ordered that that advice be burned and destroyed so no one saw it. And what then happened is that the pressure was applied mercilessly, probably, upon this Lord Goldsmith bloke to change his advice. And he did, and actually gave the advice that the invasion was actually legal. And all this manipulation is going on for reasons I'll come to in a second, because Iraq was simply one country in a list of countries being targeted for regime change by this global cabal that I've been exposing for a quarter of a century. And they needed excuses to do it. So weapons of mass destruction, even though it was a lie, was the excuse they chose. So this Burnett story, this is what the story says. The burning row relates to the 13-page legal opinion presented by Lord Goldsmith to Blair on March the 7th, 2003, less than 3 weeks before the outbreak of war. The opinion, details of which were exclusively revealed by the Mail on Sunday in 2005, stated that the war was likely to be challenged under international law because of the lack of backing from the United Nations. The advice was never released and was kept secret from most of the cabinet because, governments are completely compartmentalized. Most of the people in the cabinet of a government don't have a clue what's bloody going on. Only a few powerful aides of Blair, such as Number 10 Director of Communications Alistair Campbell, were allowed to see it. A senior Number 10 figure at the time told the Mail on Sunday last night there was pandemonium. The date when war was expected to start was already in the diary. Well, it had been for bloody years, if not to the day. And here was Goldsmith saying it could be challenged under international law. They said, burn it, destroy it, and got to work on the Attorney General. Yeah, to change his bloody mind and give them the advice they wanted. Lord Goldsmith's one-page legal opinion, produced 10 days later, and 3 days before war broke out, stripped out all his previous reservations and declared the war to be legal. This version was discussed in Cabinet and cited in Parliament to justify military invasion. So, how do the pieces fit? Well, a series of countries that this global cabal working through Britain and the United States, that they wanted to overthrow and regime change and take over, goes back years. And Iraq was just one of them. And the first public sight of this list came in September 2000 when an organization called the Project for the New American Century, neoconservatives or neocons as they were called, produced this document listing a series of countries for regime change, and regime change as a result of what they called multiple theater wars fought by the United States, either covertly or overtly through the Arab Spring. And these countries included Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, and they needed excuses to invade them, to regime change them. The people involved with the Project for the New American Century included Donald Rumsfeld and Paul Wolfowitz, who then became Defense Secretary and Deputy Defense Secretary running the Pentagon, few months later when the Bush administration came to light. Another person involved with the Project for the New American Century was Dick Cheney, who a few months later became Vice President of the United States and, in truth, President, in fact, while Boy George Bush was reading his bloody comics or something. The document also said that this process of transformation, that he called it, this series of country takeovers, would be necessarily slow absent some catalyzing and catastrophic event like a new Pearl Harbor. These characters came to power in the Bush administration a few months later, and soon after that, in the same year, in fact, 1 year to the same month that this document was published, the United States had 9/11. And Bush called it our Pearl Harbor. As a result of that terrorist attack, which was an inside job, that's why none of the pieces make any bloody sense and none of the official story makes any sense. As a result of 9/11, they had the excuse to start the war on terror. And the war on terror led eventually to the excuse to invade Iraq. And because they didn't have an excuse, they made one up. Weapons of mass destruction. It's the sequence or the technique that I call problem, reaction, solution. You create a problem covertly, you tell the people that they're in danger because of the problem and you want a reaction from the people, do something. And so after you've created the problem, got the reaction, do something, you then offer the solutions to the problems you created, which is to do what you intended to do all along, but couldn't do or justify without the manufactured problem. Now there's another version of that I call no problem, reaction, solution. You don't need a real problem, you just need to invent one and get the public perception that there's a problem, i.e. weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And so the invasion of Iraq was always going to happen, and all the bullshit about, oh no, it could still be stopped, was all lies. And so when Lord Goldsmith came along and said, actually this could be illegal, of course, burn it, destroy it, because it was a danger to the plan of invading Iraq. Then there's another thing. Dr. David Kelly. David Kelly was a weapons inspector with great experience of Iraq. And he knew that what Blair and his spin doctor, Alistair Campbell, in cohorts with British intelligence were telling the British people about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq was simply not true. And these people produced a dossier, oh, say, be very afraid. Oh, we better invade then, yeah, better be afraid. And what happened is that David Kelly, who no one really had ever heard of, in the public arena anyway, talked to a BBC journalist called Andrew Gilligan and told him that this dossier had been sexed up. In other words, it was full of bloody lies to justify the war. Now this was very, very dangerous to the credibility of the invasion. I mean, here was a weapons inspector of enormous experience in Iraq saying, actually, they're lying, in effect. And what then happened was that he was outed, was subject to enormous public attention, outed as the person who was behind Gilligan's source for the dossier being sexed up. And soon afterwards, he left home and went for a walk from which he never returned, because he went into the woods and committed suicide. And the official story of his suicide is so ludicrous, so ridiculous, so incredible, it takes the breath away. What I'm going to do in this video cast is go through the detail of these different elements. But for this, opening, if you like, I'm going to just connect the dots of how the background went on. So, as I'll talk about in detail, Kelly was murdered by the state. So then they had an inquiry into what happened to David Kelly, which was instigated by Blair and his former bloody housemate, flatmate, Lord Falconer, the top law officer of the time, the Lord Chancellor. And they appointed this guy, Lord Hutton, a real establishment bloke, to oversee the inquiry into what happened to David Kelly, who died so, shall we say, conveniently for the agenda. And the Hutton inquiry, I can only repeat, was so ludicrous, so ridiculous, so incredible, in the sense that its outcome was clearly decided before any evidence was given. This is why Lord Hutton has been known to this day as Lord Whitewash.